is the National Broadcasting Company.
Hey everyone, I'm Simone, and coming up tonight on Signal, President Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, is set to testify before Congress. And is R. Kelly finally done? Well, a lot of people hope so, after a Lifetime docu-series shed new light on horrific rape allegations against him. We talk with the co-founder of the Mute R. Kelly movement. And supermodel and science nerd Karlie Kloss sits down with the first ever female director of the National Air and Space Museum in Washington, D.C. for a very cool interview. But first, the border wall has been a sticking point for the president and Democrats as both parties can't seem to find a way to end the government shutdown. And as that drags on, federal employees are expressing very real concern about not getting paid. But there are also countless services the government pays for that are in jeopardy. Signal's Dasha Burns is looking into how the shutdown has thrown one specific law into limbo.
There's no end in sight to one of the longest government shutdowns in U.S. history. One casualty is the Violence Against Women Act. It's a law passed in 1994 that allots federal funding to programs for survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault. It's set up to require reauthorization every 5 years, and we came up on that deadline late last year. But before both parties could agree on an updated version to reauthorize,
I am proud to shut down the government for border security.
And so the act expired. But what does that mean?
National Women's Law Center.
Why should people be concerned that the Violence Against Women Act has lapsed?
It is putting at risk really fundamental services, and we need the act to be reauthorized so that all of these advocates and attorneys can keep doing their jobs.
What message do you think this sends to survivors?
I think it sends a message that our legislators are not treating survivors as important, and I think that is a powerful and tragic message to be sending out, particularly at this time.
It is a little ironic. 2018 was this historic year of nationwide movements like Me Too putting sexual assault center stage, and yet the year closed with the expiration of a law, an already existing law that had made historic strides on those very issues. Not to mention, in the wake of Me Too, organizations that help survivors say they're seeing record numbers of people seeking their services, making funds from the Violence Against Women Act more critical than ever.
This is Sarah.
What is the DC Volunteer Lawyers Project?
We provide high-quality pro bono legal representation to domestic violence victims and at-risk children. About a third of our funding comes from the Office of Violence Against Women, the entity that provides the funding to us. I've heard some reports that it's operational through January 18th, and there's a lot of uncertainty as to if it's going to affect it, when it's going to affect it, and how much notification we're going to have that it's been affected.
The uncertainty on its own is a distraction, I'm sure, sort of a cloud hanging over you guys right now.
It takes away from focusing on the victims of domestic violence. A third of our volunteers are government attorneys, and so those attorneys right now can't take cases with us because the parts of the government that run government conflicts and things like that, they're not operating because they're not working right now. We provide our services to low-income individuals, and we determine who qualifies for our services based on HUD guidelines. And the HUD guidelines for 2019 haven't even come out because
wow.
The department that's responsible for that is shut down. So we're using 2018 guidelines right now, but just things like that, it's trickling down on a lot of different levels.
Even if the government reopened tomorrow, it's not likely the Violence Against Women Act would be reauthorized the next day or even the next month. It takes time for Congress to agree on a new version, but so long as we're in a shutdown, the law is in the hands of people who can't even get the process started.
Trump made a visit to Texas this afternoon to promote his plan for a border wall. He met with Border Patrol agents as he continued to make his case. During a roundtable at the Border Patrol station, the president claimed he never said Mexico was going to write a check for the wall, which, by the way, just isn't true. Trump has repeatedly advocated for a steel slat design for his border wall. In his Oval address this week, he described this as, quote, absolutely critical for border security. And we have exclusive reports reporting that shows a DHS test of a prototype could be cut through with common tools like a saw. Trump responded to this photo claiming it's a wall designed by previous administrations. Now, Jacob Zobaroff is the one who got that exclusive and is in Hidalgo, Texas right now. Jacob, can you just bring us up to speed on Trump's visit today and your reporting about the border wall prototype?
Yeah, hey, Simone, thanks for having me on. So President Trump came down here to push for something that's very familiar to all of us at this point, his big, beautiful border wall, as he likes to call it. And as we know from watching that Oval Office address just a couple nights ago, he's settled on his design. Come with me for 1 second. I want to show you, actually. Steel. And these are what's called steel bollard fences. They've been in use along the southern border for quite some time. And just take a look up. This one, I don't know, is about 18 feet, maybe 20 feet tall. The president wants this all along the southern border, and he's been talking about how this is the design that they've settled on. But we have obtained an exclusive NBC News reporting a photograph of this type of design down at the prototypes near San Diego that have been breached from what we understand by using a common saw, the kind of saw that you might be able to purchase at Home Depot, which obviously calls into question the justification for what the president calls the need for an impenetrable border wall. He said it during the campaign. He's said it ever since. And when he's come down here today, he sort of ignores the conversation around other means of border security, saying that a wall is the only way to solve a humanitarian crisis, a security crisis, which, by the way, many people say doesn't even exist. And from my personal perspective, the crisis on the humanitarian side is one of his own making, from doing things like separating children from their parents, which I saw with my own eyes, metering people at ports of entry. And at the end of the day, now one more thing that the president doesn't really have a grasp on when it comes to the reality of life and security along the southern border, which is this thing right here when we cut open with the saw, Simone.
So, Jacob, another thing I want to ask you about, according to new reporting from NBC News, the president could potentially build a bigger, more expensive wall if he does declare a national emergency. Where would those funds come from?
Well, there's a new report out by my colleagues, Courtney Kuby and Julia Ainsley. Courtney, of course, over at the Pentagon, and Julia, national security and justice reporter, who I collaborate with quite frequently on immigration stories. The president's actually looking at and was briefed on the possibility of taking disaster funding away from places like Puerto Rico and California in order to put funds towards a border wall. There is nothing certain with this plan. It was just a briefing, according to the reporting by my colleagues. But that is certain to infuriate many people across this country. Again, the president potentially, at least looking at a plan, being briefed on a plan as we know it as of now, to take funding from people who critically need it and putting it towards something that, as critics say, is just a vanity project. It's just a campaign promise, something that the president wants for his ego more than the realities of what life is like here along the border. And so that's obviously a developing story, but one that we, definitely going to be following very closely because of where those funds would be coming from to do the border wall, Simone.
Jacob, great reporting today, as always. Thank you so much. Well, if you don't understand British politics, you're not alone. Basically, the British Parliament still hasn't agreed on exactly how they should leave the European Union. So they're debating Brexit this week ahead of a vote next Tuesday. And if they don't reach a consensus, then the UK could be set for a hard Brexit at the end of March, meaning they leave the EU without any deal in place to actually manage the exit. So Lucy Kavanagh from NBC's London Bureau went to Northern Ireland, where Brexit could mean people would need a passport to go to work.
Brexit. It's complicated, confusing. Even the people in charge don't seem to know what comes next. But here in Northern Ireland, it's a crisis that could turn lives upside down, threatening a fragile peace that took decades to achieve.
The whole context of Northern Ireland is so complex and fraught in terms of people's identity. There are two communities with two different ethnic backgrounds, two different religious backgrounds. The creation of that hard border, or any border at all, it's a far more personal, real, tangible issue of, oh, this makes me question my identity.
Before you can understand Brexit here, you need to understand a bit about Northern Ireland's troubled past. It's a dark one. When the Republic of Ireland gained independence in 1922, Northern Ireland remained part of the UK, and that was just fine for the Unionists, mostly Protestants who identified with Britain. The remaining minority, mainly Catholic nationalists, increasingly felt oppressed by British rule. It was a pressure cooker, and by the late 1960s, it exploded. People took up arms. There were car bombs, violence. British troops were stationed across Northern Ireland, installing watchtowers and checkpoints along the border. People referred to this time as the Troubles, a conflict that raged for 30 years. More than 3,600 died. In 1998, the Good Friday Agreement helped replace the bloodshed with a fragile peace. It was a compromise. Northern Ireland remained a part of the UK, but the deal allowed people to have British and Irish citizenship. It meant they could choose their identity. Now, because of Brexit, people might have to choose once again. The guns may have fallen silent, but memories don't disappear so quickly.
No, it wasn't nice. No, it definitely wasn't nice, no.
The Nelsons live on the border. In 1991, at the height of the Troubles, their 5 kids were home alone when a group of masked gunmen broke in. They tied up the kids, abducted 2 of them, tried to force one to drive a tractor with a bomb to an army checkpoint. The kid got away.
You never found out who did it?
Well, we knew it was IRA.
But they never caught the guys who did it?
No. Well, I don't think the wounds will ever heal. Even to this day, my hall door is never open. It's always locked. I know things are settled now a wee bit, but that dread's there.
The Nelsons voted to leave the European Union, but they worry that Brexit could make the Irish border once again a contested frontier.
We're just about to cross the border into Northern Ireland.
I'm crossing the border right now.
There is red. So now you're in Northern Ireland.
So I'm in Northern Ireland
yes, right now. Yes.
That does not look like a border to me.
No.
The thing about the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland is that there really isn't one. Some abandoned customs post, but that's about it. The problem with Brexit is if the UK leaves the EU and its customs deal, anything coming into the Republic of Ireland will have to be checked. But how do you do that without creating what everyone fears, a hard border?
The thing is, if there's an installation there, all it takes is somebody to react badly to that. Yeah, throws a stone at and breaks the camera. That happens 2 or 3 times, then the next thing there's a policeman there to protect the camera. The next thing, there's a group of kids coming back, and it will just escalate. And then all of a sudden you'll end up that there'll be soldiers there, there'll be armed police there, and that's what we had in the past. And though that sounds quite dramatic, and though that sounds like, oh, that'll never happen, it will happen.
Tom Murray is with Border Communities Against Brexit. He says peace helped to integrate a lot of the border towns, erasing the divisions.
How real is the threat of a return to violence?
Brexit has forced people back into identity politics. There are still people who think that the Good Friday Agreement was a failure. So there are people who will see an opportunity to manipulate younger people and bring them back into the Troubles.
Hi. Tara Grace, I'm Lucy. Nice to meet you. Jordan, nice to meet you. Let's go get a drink? Okay.
Around 3/4 of 18 to 24-year-olds voted to stay in the EU. Here, that's the peace generation. They didn't grow up with the Troubles, but they will have to live with the consequences of Brexit. Are they worried? I met up with 2 students in Belfast for a pint and a chat.
It's us taking our country back. We've decided that we're going to leave it because we want to take control of our borders and of our laws and of our money back into our own country. And we wouldn't have any sort of open borders with the European Union. We would be able to control our own immigration policy, control our own money, and control our own laws.
Well, I would say it as, to me, on the complete opposite end of the scale, Brexit is leaving the European Union, which provides us with the customs union and the single market and freedom of movement and all these amazing things that I think are massively beneficial. I like being somebody who can just travel around Europe. We want what we believe to be best. We just think what that best is delivered in different ways.
Yeah.
And whatever the outcome is, it's your generation that's going to be dealing with this. It's going to be picking up the pieces.
I think it just goes to show that we live here and we're just as confused about everything as everybody else. So.
Yeah, no one has any idea.
We're pretty good at breaking ourselves apart by ourselves. We don't need Brexit to do that for us.
The general issue of Brexit brings rise to tensions which are more significant in Northern Ireland because we're already a place rife with tension.
No one wants a return to checkpoints and watchtowers. Not in this place, not with its history. Because here, the border isn't just some line in a map. It's a compromise, a solution to a troubled past. a way of keeping the peace in a region where the wounds are still healing.
And now on to a few of today's headlines briefly, starting off with some breaking news from Trump world. Michael Cohen, the president's former lawyer and fixer, has agreed to testify publicly in front of Congress before he goes to prison next month. He's calling this part of his, quote, commitment to cooperate and provide the American people with answers. President Trump was asked about this late today and said he's not worried about Cohen's testimony. All right, now Bernie Sanders is on the defensive today, having to address allegations that male staffers on his 2016 presidential campaign sexually harassed female coworkers. Last night, Politico reported that Sanders' former Iowa campaign manager, Robert Becker, had been named by two former campaign staffers in a $30,000 federal discrimination settlement. Sanders addressed reports of sexual harassment once this month, and this new report forced him to speak out again today.
To the women in our campaign who were harassed or mistreated, I apologize. Our standards, our procedures, our safeguards were clearly inadequate.
And then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was in Cairo today, laying out the Trump administration's approach to the Middle East. He's hitting a bunch of countries in the region on this messaging tour where he hopes to clean up confusion about America's role in Syria. Now, this comes after President Trump announced he was going to pull U.S. troops out of Syria immediately, which concerned our allies and prompted Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis to resign. But now we're hearing the withdrawal will happen slowly. Pompeo shot down the idea there was any change, let alone inconsistency in the plan.
There's no contradiction whatsoever. This is a story made up by the media. And President Trump's decision to withdraw our troops has been made. We will do that.
Now, Pompeo also went after the Obama administration's Middle East policies, saying America has learned from its mistakes and the era of, quote, American shame is over. All right, now Amazon CEO and the richest man in the world, Jeff Bezos, tweeted yesterday that he and his wife, Mackenzie, are getting a divorce. Why? Well, word on the street, an affair between Jeff and an LA news anchor who happens to be married to a powerful Hollywood agent. Whew. People are watching this story with one question in mind. Who gets the Bezos fortune? Forbes says Jeff Bezos is worth $136 billion. And because of divorce laws in Washington state where the couple lives, Mackenzie could get half of that because they got married just a year before he started the company. And TMZ is saying they didn't have a prenup. Now, even with just half of that fortune, Mackenzie Bezos would take the title of the richest woman in the world. She'll be able to pay for a lot. And those are your headlines, briefly. We'll be right back in 30 seconds.
The topics we cover on MSNBC every day, they're driven by big ideas, big themes, huge societal changes. And that's what we talk about on our new podcast. It's called Why Is This Happening?
Why Is This Happening with Chris Hayes. New episodes every Tuesday.
We are going to start with something different tonight. This is one of those things that you have not been otherwise hearing about in the news, but stick with me.
Feed your mind with fresh perspective. Get your favorite MSNBC shows now as podcasts.
All right, one prominent Democratic donor, two mysterious deaths, and a host of unanswered questions. It sounds like the stuff of conspiracy theories, but this is the true bizarre story unfolding in Los Angeles right now involving Ed Buck. He's a political activist who's donated to the campaigns of high-profile Democrats. And Buck faces a new investigation after a second black gay man was found dead inside his West Hollywood apartment within the past 18 months. Now, the cause of death of the second man is still under investigation. But Jasmine Canick is a journalist in the LA area who's been following this story since the beginning, and she got her hands on a journal that might offer clues about these deaths. Jasmine, can you just walk us through this series of events that's been unfolding over the past 18 months?
Right. So on July 27, 2017, Jamel Moore dies of a crystal meth overdose in Ed Buck's home. His death was just simply classified as an accidental overdose, and the books were closed on it. And what happened is that we found his journal, and in his journal, his very, very personal journal, he detailed his relationship with Ed Buck.
There were some excerpts in there that were very chilling. Can you just tell me what were some of the major takeaways that you found in Jamel Moore's journal?
That Jamel had never done crystal meth before, and that Ed Buck was the first one to inject crystal meth in him, and that because of Ed Buck, according to Jamel, he became an addict and became addicted to crystal meth. That is the most startling thing inside of his journals. And then just the depression that this young man was obviously experiencing at that time.
So, Jasmine, just getting us up to speed to the events that happened this week. I know there have been very public protests and really an outcry from the public following this second man who was found inside Ed Buck's apartment.
So in July of 2018 is when Jackie Lacey, our district attorney, decided they couldn't press charges against Ed Buck. So then we have Timothy Dean dying almost 6 months to the exact day that decision was made. And so now people are actually kind of really paying attention because it's 2 overdoses of 2 Black men in the same person's house. And people are starting to listen to Ed Buck's victims. They're starting to come forward and tell their stories. And I'm sure that there are going to be a lot more young men who come out and feel comfortable to now say, and I also had, this experience with Ed Buck. He is a very well-known man in those circles.
Well, Jasmine, thank you so much for the work that you've been doing on this story, and thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you, Simone.
Such a mind-blowing story. And now on to another one. Everyone is talking about this docu-series on Lifetime called Surviving R. Kelly, which outlined more than 2 decades of accusations against the R&B superstar. Now, several women open up on camera about their encounters with him. And the accusers allege he sexually assaulted them, used violence to subdue them, and raped underage girls. NBC News spoke to R. Kelly's attorney, who called the accusers featured in the program haters, just trying to ruin R. Kelly's career. And then I had a conversation with the co-founder of the Mute R. Kelly movement, and we talked about what this series could mean for Kelly, his career, and his place in the Black community.
The Mute R. Kelly movement started because it was time. R. Kelly's behavior has been going on for over 30 years, and we've heard the rumors. We saw what happened with Aaliyah. We saw the child pornography. We watched in horror that acquittal.
What is it about the music industry that makes it immune to some of the same criticisms that Hollywood has faced and the same reckonings with all these high-profile directors and actors having to become accountable for their sexual misconduct? Why do you think it is that the music industry just gets a free pass?
Well, I think it has a lot to do with just the content within a lot of our music. A lot of our music is highly misogynistic. It's highly focused on hypermasculine behaviors. Look at what happened with Dr. Luke and Kesha. I mean, it's a very similar situation.
Chance the Rapper apologized for working with R. Kelly, but he's someone who continued to work with him, and it's hard to make an argument that he wasn't aware. So what do you take away from an apology from someone like Chance the Rapper?
A lot of the artists knew R. Kelly would skyrocket or revive their career, and they were able to reconcile his behavior versus what he could do for him. So I believe for a lot of these artists, their involvement with him was extremely opportunistic. Very often, we come around too late. I do want to say better late than never.
How much do you think the Black community has been complicit in shielding R. Kelly, or has the Black community been too easy on him?
Primary supporters of the Mute R. Kelly movement are also Black people and women of color. The primary supporters of R. Kelly are also Black women and women of color. He is an icon. He came from very humble beginnings, and he made it out with his music. And for a lot of people, they see him as the one who got out. So they're going to protect him. even at the expense of harming other girls.
If there is a positive that can come out of this, perhaps it's the conversation that's been started about the treatment of Black women in this country, and specifically how we respond to Black women when they say that they have experienced trauma or sexual assault.
Right. Well, according to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, over 60% of Black women have experienced some degree of sexual violence before her 18th birthday. And we have to no longer downplay the impact of sexual trauma on Black women and girls, and we need to elevate it to the same level of trauma as we do white supremacy.
I think the big question on everyone's mind now is this the end of the road for R. Kelly? What are you hearing about what accountability he could be facing?
Well, right now, the DA in Cook County, Illinois, is calling for all survivors, all women who have been harmed by him, to come forward, so that she's open to pursuing criminal charges if those charges are there. I think now that we're seeing the cogs turning with our law enforcement, time might actually be up. He might have to now face the music, for lack of a better phrase, because he can't continue doing this forever.
Now, when it comes to aviation, the United States is a country of firsts. Think the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, Neil Armstrong stepping on the moon, and now, for the first time ever, the National Air and Space Museum in D.C. has a female director. Science nerd and supermodel Karlie Kloss spoke to her for NBC's Today about what it's like to be a woman in an industry historically dominated by men.
Dr. Ellen Stoffen, thank you for having us here in the museum. I wanted to ask, is this a full circle moment for you, being that when you were in college, you were an intern here at the National Air and Space Museum, now coming back as the director? How does that feel?
It feels amazing, because to me this is such an iconic place. I mean, behind you is the lunar module. Up above us is the Spirit of St. Louis, the Bell X-1 that Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier in. And so this place is just such a place of stories of American heroism, American ingenuity, and to be able to say, how do we make this place even better? How do we bring it into the next century is an incredible honor.
Space and NASA really played a role even early in your life. Your dad was a scientist for NASA. Did that really influence you to choose the career path you did?
Yeah, it's funny because I went to my first rocket launch when I was 4 years old, and my dad was a rocket engineer. He actually was a rocket scientist. But at that time, I didn't really think about myself as working for NASA, because everybody who worked for NASA looked like my dad. And I would really search for stories about women in science, and I'd find a book about Marie Curie and another book about Marie Curie. And it just didn't go much beyond that. And the other thing, I just, because people are always asking me, look, what advice can you give to young women, who want to take on leadership? And I always feel like, well, that's important, but I also want to give a message to men and say, we need a meritocracy. We need everybody to be treated as to what they can contribute. And we're not quite there yet. We can get there, but it's on everybody to really help talent move forward, no matter what that talent looks like.
I couldn't agree more. And I think you play such an important role here at the museum to educate and inspire.
People have said to me, is it important that you're the first woman director? And I want to say, no, of course not. Women are completely capable of doing anything. But it is important, because I want to inspire that girl who comes into this museum to say, I could run the Air and Space Museum, but even more, I could be the first girl to walk on Mars.
That's our show for tonight, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you next week.